Hello and welcome to the Miraculous Lightworkers channel, your go-to place for all things about lightworkers and enlightenment. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. What we're going to do is discuss an article that was produced on September 5th of 2015 by an author named Makia Freeman. You can find this on the rainbowwaveoflight.wordpress.com website. And the article is entitled Nine Solutions for Overcoming Humanities' Original Distortion. Now, I'm going to go ahead and preface this by just kind of giving my short analysis on the article. So, one of the things that I find really interesting about this is that it crosses a line for me, and yet it's very pertinent and very useful at the same time. When I say it crosses a line, with all due respect to the author, because I am using her work to discuss this topic, is that a lot of what you look at when you're talking about some of these A Course in Miracles types of concepts is that it looks very New Age, and a lot of the New Age stuff it can cross a line for me where it goes from being useful, helpful, factual, necessary, even in some situations, information, into a place where it gets very conspiracy theory and sort of you start getting into the headspace of the person, and some of this stuff can be really just not factual. It's what's going on in that person's paradigm, in their head, and their makeup of the world. So um, I really want to respect everything that she says, but she does say some things that it crosses a line for me personally. But that's just me trying not to judge what the author's opinion of things is. But you always have to take people's opinion, with a grain of salt, right? So I'm going to give you the 9 solutions written out before I sort of dive into the article itself a little bit. And before I tell you the 9 things, the 9 solutions for overcoming humanity's original distortion, I need to preface that with the original distortion, right? The original distortion, in Makia Freeman's words, are the real meaning behind the fall of man and the Garden of Eden. That story um, is filled with a lot of allegory and a lot of there's missing pieces to it, shall I say. There's things that go on in Genesis that are clearly jumping from one point to another without giving the backstory. One of those things would be, when Cain is banished for killing Abel, and he's given this mark, and he's sent out into a city. This tells you that there's already a large enough population to require cities. That's a high level of population coming from being in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and they just have a few kids. Outside of, okay, at this point they'd already been kicked out of the Garden of Eden, but they were in a separate space still yet. When Cain kills Abel, God says, you can't lie to me. I hear your brother's blood crying out from the earth. Now you have to go out there. And he's like, you can't do that because they'll kill me. And he's like, nobody's going to kill you. I'll put this mark on you and I'll make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so my point in speaking about that is because there's some backstory here that's clearly missing. Okay, if you talk to Jewish scholars, for instance, they'll tell you that going back Adam had a wife before Eve, but why is all this left out of our scriptures? And then we're told that it's complete and it's true and everything. And I am not negating, most of what is in the Bible is factual and it's based on historical evidence. But I'm saying that it's clear, and it's not even up for question really, because we know that there were books that were removed from the Bible. In the what is it, when they did the Nicene Council, I believe it was called, they ended up saying, we don't want this book in there, we don't want that book in there, we're just going to remove these ones because we find those to be too controversial and they don't mesh with the rest of the text. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. It's all historical, factual information. So, and I encourage you to. Some of those books I've read myself, like in the Apocrypha, for instance. It's hard to read some of this stuff because there is a lot of redundancy within the Old Testament, which is why some of these things were removed. But there's also other things that would really add to the richness of the scripture if they had not been removed. So, in that wisdom, I'm going to go ahead and, I have to preface this by sort of giving you a little bit of backstory, a little bit of depth to the conversation. Because when Makia Freeman is talking about the real meaning behind the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, she is pointing to these things where there's a lot that went on in that story that modern Christianity doesn't touch. It's afraid to go there. So, number one, remember who you are. All right. So, that in and of itself is pretty much, a lot of people's life's work. They can't remember who they are. They can't remember what they came for. They don't know what this life is all about, trying to find the meaning of life, this kind of thing. Remember who you are. Remember who I am is that sent you, and you will remember who you are. Number two, practice being centered in your heart. Most of us don't stay centered in our heart. And so you have all these distortions in our world. We stay stuck in our lower primal survival level inclinations. If you can stay centered in your heart, speak your truth, use the power of your mind, that's how you learn to ascend. You come up above the lower level, basic survival, wounded experience, psychological trip kind of stuff, and rise into your heart. Most people who think they're spiritual struggle with this all the time because they still want to lay judgments on people and all this stuff. And they have a hard time coming from a place that's just heart, that's just compassion. Number three, realize happiness is way more dependent on the state of the mind than external wealth. The wealth of your mind is everything, okay? Money can't buy happiness, we know that. A lot of people have gotten into situations where they had lots of money and they were deceived terribly because more money, more problems, right? Because they were living from a place where, and there's nothing wrong with this, being money-minded and powerful in the world. The problem comes when you get attached to that wealth and somebody uses it against you, or, like the story of Job. You can have everything and it can all be taken away from you. And then it can all be restored again. It's pretty amazing how that works. But that's the point, really, is to realize that the power of your mind is what's going to decide the trajectory of your life, not how much money you have. You can have all the money in the world and be crying yourself a river of tears because your heart's not fulfilled, because your mind isn't right, because you put all of your energy into creating wealth, but neglected your own self and your own spirit in favor of what was out there in the world, right? Balance is key. You need both to survive, right? Okay, number 4, use your breath as a tool. Okay, a lot of people are not familiar with this, but the light worker community really is. Breath work is probably one of the most powerful things you can do to heal, to stay centered in this now moment, to be composed, to give what we here in Hawaii call your ha, your breath of life, into the world. Use the power of your voice with your breath to birth beauty into the world. Number 5, realize you are not your thoughts. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of Course in Miracles teachings, and it's all about understanding that we get consumed with thinking that we are the product of our thought. And everything around us in our environment validates that for us. But if you get stuck in that modality of thinking, believe that your ego is responsible for making you. And so when things don't go well, you're at the whim of the ego, and the ego will try to just absolutely destroy you. It wants to paint you this way and it wants to paint you that way, but it never ever wants to see you for what you really are. That is how you can catch that thing in the act, right? We need an ego. It helps us get along in this life, but it is destructive if it's left unchecked, okay? Realize you are not your thoughts. Number 6, integrate your shadow. This one I struggled with before I came on today, going, I'm teaching a Course in Miracles, and the Course in Miracles is very clear about the fact that the shadow is a lie. But I've studied a lot of Jungian psychiatry, and Jung was always a huge proponent of integrating the shadow in order to become a whole person. I could sit here and go back and forth with psychologists all day, but what it comes down to is that's a westernized way of thinking, and it may be one way to help people to heal, but I want to go straight to the heart of it, straight to the source of it. We don't have time to play around with your ego anymore. Your ego is false. Your ego is a lie that would love for you to subscribe to all of its shadow stuff as a way to delay you, okay? So, being aware of the ego is one thing. Trying to integrate your shadow is another, okay? So, number 7, avoid emotionally draining drama with the 4 agreements. These come from Don Miguel Ruiz. Look it up. This stuff is really, really powerful. 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word. Don't take things personally. 3, don't make assumptions. 4, always do your best. And that seems really straightforward and simple, but just you try to actually live the 4 agreements in your day-to-day life. Number 1, be impeccable with your word. Never tell a lie. Not for anybody. Not for any reason. That is harder than you think, because a lot of people tell white lies and they're very pathological about it. They really don't see anything wrong with it. Number 2, don't take things personally. Here we go back again in that loop with the ego thing, where the ego wants to take everything personally. Everything is either somebody stroking your ego or somebody attacking your ego. And there's no in between. And your ego just absolutely thrives on this stuff in a really vicious cycle, actually. It's bizarre to watch how it will do that. And it takes everything you have to literally remove yourself and take a step back and not take things personally. Just stand in your power from your place of spirit and say, "You're not going to run me like that. I see what's going on there, and I'm on to you." Number 4, don't make assumptions. We all make assumptions, but this is about humility. It's about taking that step back and saying, "You know what? I'm not going to assume that I know all the facts. I'm going to come to this from a place." There was one psychologist, I used to listen to her all the time, and I'm going to forget her name right now. She's really super helpful. We used to talk on Dr. Laura. Dr. Laura? Was it Dr. Laura? Now I'm forgetting. She's on AM radio. She has her own show. Um, and I'm sure she still does, actually, because she was nationally syndicated. But she would always say, approach things curious, not furious. That's the simple concept of moving from the assumption of, I think I know what's going on, to, I'm going to come at this from a real perspective and say, how can I ask this in a way that doesn't feel like an attack? I'm not assuming anything. I just need to get down to the bottom of things, right? Number 4, always do your best. See, these are those things you say it in one sentence and it seems like, well, that's simple enough. I'll just do my best. Our best should constantly be improving. So this is, when you say it's your best today might be different than your best tomorrow too. So doing your best and being honest with yourself about it is just, it's next level stuff. If you went and I do recommend this, like I said, Don Miguel Ruiz, the 4 agreements, he actually has a 5th agreement. There's all kinds of stuff within that whole sort of collective. Look it up. It's really powerful. It's really helpful. Yeah, if you looked him up though, you'd see how deep this stuff is. Always do your best is like, there's more to it than just one sentence. When you dive into it, it becomes a lot deeper water. So, all right, so number 8, be the change you wish to see. How many times have we heard that? Be the change you wish to see. It's really important that when you see things that look really negative in the world, that you try to figure out how to be the answer to that. That's how you overcome the original distortion. Okay? Not falling prey to the ego, not falling prey to fear, but actually activating and becoming proactive, moving in a positive way, bringing in the light. Okay? Bring more light into our world. Number 9, remember the purpose of life and find your individual mission. Right now, I am really glad to say that I'm finally responding to the call. The call was here for years, but I felt like I had every reason for why I couldn't succeed, and the time wasn't right, and trust me, I found a lot of ways to slow myself down in the process. Okay, so from the article, I'm just going to read this to you a little bit, and we can go ahead and stop in between the paragraphs and talk about it just a little bit. So what is the original distortion? Researchers such as David Icke and Michael Sarian have talked about it. It's humanity's collective primal wound. It's the psychic split or psychic schism our ancestors suffered as a result of some terrible trauma, and it has left us handicapped, a fraction of the magnificent beings we once were. How do we know this? By connecting the dots and gathering information from a wide variety of sources, including the myths and stories from cultures, races, and spiritualities all over the world, past and present, who refer to this original distortion and refer to what we used to be able to do as a species. It is what makes much of our behavior schizophrenic and insane. Ooh, all right, that's rich. Got to touch a little bit on that before we go too much deeper. Okay, so what you have right now is there's a lot of people who are in this movement, and the ascension has begun. It's happening. Like it or not, You jump on the wagon or you just watch it roll by pretty much at this moment because it's in motion. Okay? We are getting to a point where I used to think of it as running out of time, but time is an illusion. So what's happening is the pain is becoming so great of watching what happens when we don't respond to spirit that people are finally buckling under the pressure of that and saying, mercy, fine, okay, what do I have to do? Tell me, spirit, what I need to do. I'm in that place of humility. I know from examples, current and past, that I'm not at my potential. And I want to know where that potential is. I know it's there. How do I unlock that? How do I get back to the place where that psychic split can be healed? Because we literally see this split occur in a myriad of ways throughout the universe, okay? But it starts with something as simple as us. Follow me here, because this gets a little different. You have to sort of expand your mind to be able to receive this. But we are bilateral creatures, okay? This is the split from oneness into two mirroring sides of ourselves. We have the masculine and we have the feminine. We have the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain. We have the hot and the cold. We have the light and the dark, the yin and the yang, the dance of dualities that it's mirrored throughout the cosmos. The split that occurred, it's all here, all of these things to reflect and show us in a very clear way what has occurred. Anything you can observe is part of bringing us back into the healed place. But first you have to learn to identify it. And most people won't. They see, oh yeah, everything's in polarity. Everything's good and bad. It's, heaven and hell. It's right and wrong. It's so unquestionable, the polarity there, that nobody asks why. And this goes back to the original distortion. We aren't supposed to be in duality. Now, don't take that as like we're not supposed to be bilateral beings. We are not supposed to be working from a framework of two split places in our mind. The masculine and the feminine are supposed to be in balance. There's not supposed to be this dichotomy where things are in such stark contrast from each other. That's just a reflection of where we are based on the initial split. Okay? So, and it makes us look schizophrenic and insane because we bounce so quickly between our love energy and our hate energy, between our pure compassion to our absolute viciousness. And it's all there. This is what they're talking about when they're, it's important to know what that shadow is about. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying it isn't going to help us to get to where we need to be to try and honor the lie more. We know it's there. We're not confused about that. Okay, so the Garden of Eden is a highly symbolic story, but it's misinterpreted or not understood at all by many people, including many Christians. On a superficial level, it warns us about temptation and how our desire for sensory pleasure or short-term gratification can lead us into suffering. On a deeper level, it highlights how the God of the Old Testament is a wrathful figure who punishes those who dare to evolve and develop their intelligence. This God, of course, is not the true first source or all-loving God that many people sense and envision, but rather a distorted God, intent on keeping his place as ruler in the hierarchy. Whew, ain't that loaded. So this is where the Course gets really to a point of making a lot of sense, which is we as human beings, in our dichotomy of love and hate, our bliss versus anger, all that dance of polar opposites where we want to project what is in us onto what we think is out there and call it by something that we understand. Because God is so massive and so incredibly, mysterious, we can't know it the way that we want to believe that we can know it. We can't pin it down. We were created in a way that we can never be the master prototype we want to believe and understand, but saying that God can't be both. Here's the really confusing part where most people are like, yes, but he's both. No, that starts to look very, very schizophrenic, very insane. Either God is an all-loving God who's impartial, and that's why we see the suffering in the world that we create and try to project onto him, saying he's an angry, wrathful God. Or it's if he's really that angry, if he's really that vindictive, why do we still exist as a species whatsoever at all? He could have ended this a long time ago. I don't believe God's cruel. I believe that it's up to us. He gave us free will to end this thing that we did and would like to blame on him and call him the bad guy for allowing this, horrible, misconstrued reality that we have in front of us to occur. And so you see the prophets in their humanness, and many times, God, how long are you going to wait to exact revenge on these people that are coming to, defame me and coming to take my life, And God says, a little while longer, a little while longer. You're still having what's happening coming through the voice of human beings who want to see that happen. And God didn't do it. In his impartiality, he allowed the prophets to die because he knew that their spirits were intact, regardless of what happened on the physical plane. And he kept trying to introduce things. This is where it gets super complicated, okay? Because I believe they were in communication with God. And in their humanness, they're like, please don't make me go do this, God. People are going to try to kill me. Don't send me out there. And he's like, well, it's better off for you that you do what I'm telling you right now. And they're like, but they're going to stone me to death. And he said, don't run. Don't be like Jonah. Don't try to head in the other direction on the first boat out. Do what you're told and realize this is something that most people do not get from Scripture. Your soul is assured because that's what's real. Nobody wants to lose their life. But, Jesus was very clear. He says, the one that loses his life for me is the one who's really gained it, because you didn't just cling to what you loved here in the world, but you did what was right by your Maker, the one who sent you. So, that's that whole paragraph is just so loaded. It's hard to even touch on all the points of it, but I'm going to allow you, if you really want to go and dive into that, I'm going to link the article in the description box so that you can have a chance to go check that out. All right, on another level, the Garden of Eden myth represents the fall of man, a highly significant event in humanity's history where we fell from our hearts to our heads. It's kind of upside down. Or to our guts, like we went all the way down, unfortunately, into our survival instincts instead of living from our heart at all. instead of even living from our head. We're just ruled by our we need to survive kind of instinct. By this, I mean we moved out of heart center, the true leader and center of the body, into a lower center, not as fit for leading. Some say this is the head, due to our obsession with left brain analysis and incessant thinking. Some say this is the gut, due to our tendencies to act from lower state emotions like fear, greed, and desire for pleasure. But that's not so important. The point is that rather than using our heart and true self to lead us, we're using our brains, our guts, and our ego to lead us, which is a literal falling from grace. There's another sinister aspect of this story, of course, and that involves the snake. There's evidence that the fall of man was not the result of a momentary lapse of reason on the part of Eve and Adam, as it has been portrayed, but rather the result of a cold and calculated intervention by an outside force. I refer to the alleged genetic tampering. See, this is where we get into that airy-fairy stuff. I'm not even going to lie. This is where it kind of crosses the line for me, but I'm going to read it anyway so you can hear it. The alleged genetic tampering that occurred to early man, which is surely a cause for a deep and gaping collective primal psychic wound. Indeed, it is hard to imagine more of a violation than someone going in and messing around with your genetics and disconnecting parts of it to suppress your full potential. Many researchers, authors, mystics, and other people have referred to the original distortion as genetic intervention. Some, such as Barbara Marciniak, have suggested that this is why humans now operate on 2-strand DNA instead of 12-strand DNA. It also explains why we have all this genetic material sitting there unused, a phenomenon which has led many scientists to brand it as junk DNA in their ignorance. Okay, so I'm going to have to pause in the middle of this because, oh boy, it gets into a whole nother level here. I'm trying not to laugh because somebody truly believes this, but essentially, I'm just going to speak to the part about the DNA. So what happened is, in my opinion, at some point, our DNA, whether you want to call it tampering or not, was disabled, essentially. But that had to do with us needing time to develop as a earthbound species. We have witnessed people who seem to have these DNA activations. See, this is where we start crossing that line where it's like, how much of this is science? What I'm going to definitely go with here at this moment, because we're watching it happen, so it's an active process, and we're engaged as participants here, whether we like it or not. It's happening in our midst. It's occurring. It's either jump in the wagon or get left behind at this moment. Figure out what's going on. I'm going to share a little bit of my experience, which is spiritual activation. So even if you can't prove this at a genetic level, where we're saying we observably watch this many strands of DNA get activated to this many strands of DNA, and that's responsible for da-da-da. I don't think we're going to have time for that. That's my professional opinion on it. And I will say we are witnessing people coming into this level of awareness, the sixth sense, being able to communicate mind to mind. Like, we used to think this stuff was way out there, like only like psychics and the rarest of rare can accomplish something like that. It's becoming normalized. Hear me when I say that. It's becoming normal, where it didn't used to seem like something that was attainable by the average person by any stretch of the imagination. We are activating. It's happening. Okay? And it's a really profound experience to watch it happen. I'm activating. I'm watching it occur. And oh, I'm all chicken skin just thinking about it. So here we are, it's happening. Observe what's occurring. You, even if you can't see it at a physiological level, the physiological level is not as important as what's going on spiritually. It's spiritual activation. We're being brought back into the fullness for those of us who are humble enough and desire it. I mean, like, for me to start to have this occur in my life, I had to want it more than anything in the world, and I had to be willing to act on the call. So when you get to that level, you don't even think that you're walking into it. Most people, to be a light worker per se, you end up doing it because that's what you're made to be. You are a spiritual being living this human experience, and you literally become the channel by which the light comes through and it pours out through you into the world by virtue of what you are. It's not you saying, God, I want to be a light worker when I grow up. It's not even how it occurred for me whatsoever at all. I knew I had a special task, a special mission from a young age when I come into this world, but I couldn't understand it and I didn't have a lot of spiritual guidance toward that. So we are really coming into the age of enlightenment, and there's no holding back. When spirit dictates that this is what's supposed to happen, you either jump on and you're going for what God tells you, or you get left behind. You watch people going by and you go, oh wow, who are they to think that they know anything about what spirit wants, or anything about the coming of days, this kind of thing. Who are they to think that they know anything? That's an ego ploy to hold you still, to prevent you from moving into the fullness of who you are supposed to be, who you came to be, who you really are. It's meant to freeze you in your tracks so there's no way you can advance by judging those out there. Because what you're doing is you're coming from a place where you're actually projecting and saying, I don't think that's possible based on what I believe to be true, based on my life experience, and I'm not humble enough to ask a question. I'm just going to judge other people and laugh at other people for having this highly spiritual experience because I can't understand it. Maybe I'm jealous. Maybe I want that, but I can't have it. There's any number of distortions that they're just distractions. That's what the ego does. It's meant to hold you still. Okay, so remember who you are. Who are you? You are a soul, a spirit, a consciousness with a body. You are energy. You are connected to all that is. Indeed, you are the universe. You are an individualized part of all that is. You could say you are God, but that term has been so misinterpreted and projected upon, it may be better to use other terminology. Okay, now I'm going to stop in the tracks right there because, again, me and the author are disagreeing here, but other people would have a different experience with this. She used a capital G for God. You are not God. You are a creation of a creator. You have God-like tendencies because of what made you. So you were created to create. You will never be the equivalent of God. Thinking that somehow you are going to attain to the level of the Godhead is foolhardy, because you can't even get around your own ego here on this planet. So don't even act like you gotta rise into the power of the Almighty with His discernment for all of His children. People are at this moment not capable of coming to a place of living from their heart center. How are you going to say that you are even a lowercase g God if you can't get around yourself and realize your limitation? Yes, you have infinite potential, but you have to get to a place of clarity, and you have to get to a place of purity to deserve that honor, really. Now, a lot of people would argue with me about that, but you can't be given infinite power, the power to heal and raise the dead until you get there. You can't just, because people will misuse it because they're selfish and they're wound up in their ego. So this is where it's important to recognize the shadow. I didn't say integrate the shadow, but know what it is doing. Okay? Even lowercase g, like, it's such a can of worms. I don't know if I can even do that in one short segment, but lowercase g, yeah, there was lowercase g's on our planet. We know it. It's evident in the archaeological record. Okay, we had what looked like they call them the men of old, the men of renown, that were essentially, they still had the activated DNA and they were capable of superhuman feats. People would look at them and say, and they would worship them, even though they weren't uppercase G God, the creator. They possessed more power than we do because they were closer to source, to the original, uh, prototype of what He made. Okay, we are in a state of uh, deleterious decline. And it's unfortunate, but we can see it uh, perpetuated throughout humanity at this moment in the lack of power, the powerlessness that people are going through. Um, yeah, that's just, whew, that's loaded, because there was a time when people recognized the ones who did possess that greater potential, and it lives on in the legends of cultures throughout the world. This is where you start to get to some really deep water. One day we'll discuss this about the bloodlines and how some bloodlines were kept pure, and how the Bible was very, very specific about trying to preserve certain bloodlines, not to mix races and things like this, and how that led to a later experience, what we're dealing with now, with problems with people of mixed nationality. It's only like in the last 30 years that it became acceptable in some countries for mixed nationality people to be allowed to be together. It was still illegal and still is in many places for people who are not of the same nationality to be married. Okay, so continuing on. You are infinite because the real you is energy, and energy cannot be destroyed but only transformed. Infinite energy is all powerful and cannot be dictated to or bossed around. The original distortion has led us to feeling disconnected from this fundamental truth of existence. We are in bodies. So this is where it gets confusing. This is where I start to differ from other light worker sort of perspectives on things sometimes, which is to tell somebody they're infinite in a very finite body is very confusing, because We have infinite potential because we're made up of stardust and atoms and H2O. And this is sort of what unites us as a humanity. We're all the same exact thing. Okay? All on borrowed time, all coming from the same exact elements, um, all restricted to, roughly 100 years or less on the planet. If we're lucky, we get a good 100 years in, right? Um, that doesn't look very infinite if you're looking at it from a human perspective. The real you that is energy, the energy that cannot be destroyed, your spirit, but only can be transformed, that is truth. That's where you get to the truth. Not the composition of this avatar, but the actual essence that is I. The I that is I that will transcend this body when I drop this mortal coil. Infinite energy is all powerful and cannot be dictated to or bossed around. See, this represents an authority issue here, basically, because you were created by the infinite. Not necessarily to be infinite, but what you are has a capacity that you underestimate because you're too busy dwelling on the finite part of this existence, the avatar. And you don't think about how powerful your spirit really is, that you can reach out and communicate with other people. They can feel you at a distance, even because of that infinite capacity. Acknowledging that and magnifying that is incalculably important. Like it's everything right now. Figure out the capacity of your mind to co create and to connect with other minds, and you'll start to touch on these things where you're just blown away because there were things that you didn't think were possible. Okay? The original distortion has led us to feeling disconnected from this fundamental truth of existence. Okay, so the containers that we're in here with our spirit makes us feel separate from one another, and it makes us feel separate from the one that created us in his likeness and image to love and to be and create the way that he does, right? So, yeah, that's all true. That distortion where we separated and suddenly Adam's in the garden, walking, hiding from God, and God's looking for him. Adam, where are you? Adam says, I was hiding. God asking him, why were you hiding? Because I was naked. He didn't realize he was naked before this, right? And it didn't matter. He wasn't cold, he wasn't scared, he wasn't self-conscious, he wasn't self-aware. And God instantly, this is one of the most interesting parts of Genesis to me, instantly asked him, who told you you were naked? Who gave you the awareness that you were less than perfect? Who made you feel like you weren't worthy of walking with me? It's just, okay. I'm going to let that one go and move on to number 2. Practice being centered in your heart. In Chinese medicine, the heart is the emperor. Many spiritual paths emphasize the importance of developing and expanding your heart, such as Sufism, which is basically the path to the open heart, path of the open heart, and whose followers sing songs in Arabic, roughly translated as, there's only one being, and that being is love. I'm not going to go terribly deep into this because, some of this stuff, you just get really next level, and it's like, deal with what's going on here now. Don't tell me about interdimensional beings that are doing things that I can't see, I can't identify, they're not affecting me. And I seriously doubt their existence because you can't show me anything tangible to prove to me otherwise. I believe in God, but I'm not going to sit here and buy into a whole bunch of airy-fairy nonsense that has no practicality and no bearing on what's important right now, which is the awakening of the spirit. That's what's at hand, okay? Overcoming the distortion. coming back to a place of oneness where we're not all in separation and we can understand that we are exactly the same. We're all spirit. We're all extensions of God's love. We all share a similar destiny. Those are the parts of things that, we need to acknowledge. Don't feed me all the, new age nonsense that isn't going to help me get there. I don't want to. It's very easy to get led astray. Okay, that's where I differ from a lot of the supposedly new agers, is because I come from a grounding in biblical texts. I work with A Course in Miracles, which is a companion to me for my Bible. Okay, I've been through both of those books very thoroughly, beginning to end, 2 times in the linear fashion, and then I've gone back into them over and over and over and poured into them in a directed fashion. Like, I need to go back to this story and read that again. I need to go to this one and figure out what was going on there. I need to go make footnotes and tie it all together, etc. Right? So my grounding in scripture is what guides me. Number 3, realize happiness is way more dependent on your state of mind than external wealth. I don't know if we need to go a kabillion times over that. That's pretty evident. Most people who've lived long enough to have money and have lost some money will attest to that. Number 4, use your breath as a tool. Look up breath work if you don't know about that, okay? It's huge. Your breath of life, is it's your centering connection to what is real in the here and now, and the gift that is life and other human beings. This is what connects us at a level of humanity where you will understand. Can't remember where I heard this. How fleeting life is if you just take the air out of the room. Take all the air out of the room, and pretty quickly, there's nothing else that you want more or need more to survive, and everything is dependent upon it. But most people just take that very much for granted, especially those of us that have real good lung function. People who don't take it a little more seriously. Anyways, number 5, realize you are not your thoughts. This one I'm going to give a little weight to. Your thoughts are not your own. No one knows exactly where they come from, but the key is not to identify with them. Okay, we're only 2 sentences in, and I have to stop because when it says your thoughts are not your own, you can have thoughts that are your own. It's just that normally you're receiving and regurgitating thoughts that came from somewhere else, and you can't even identify how far back that goes. That can be intergenerational. You can be dealing with thoughts that were recycled, that were wrong for generation after generation, okay? Not to identify with the thoughts is pretty much the most important part. If you can realize to identify with your spirit, with the Holy Spirit within, because your thoughts are based out of what's going on with your ego and trying to validate and either build you up or destroy you. Okay, your ego is a liar, it's an imposter, and it will try to take you away from what's real and tell you that your spirit is the myth. Okay, most of the time it's just mindless crap the brain is processing, or thoughts of judgment, blame, and fear. It is mostly serving to separate you from the world, not connect you. Yeah, see, again, get into this deeper stuff. This article is next level. I'm just cherry picking from it the parts that I felt were incredibly valuable. So, I'm not even going to give any weight to integrate your shadow. If you want to look at shadow work and you find it helpful, by all means, go down that road and figure out what's there. and make the corrections that you need to. All paths lead home. I do believe that, but it's a matter of how long are you going to take to get there. Is it just a detour? So, number 7, avoid emotional and draining drama with the 4 agreements. Can't say enough about Don Miguel Ruiz and the 4 agreements. Really, it's a short book. Read it. It's worth your time. And if it can shift you that fast, that is a miracle. Right there. Okay? Be the change you wish to see. This one, of course, is a famous saying from Mahatma Gandhi and a very important concept for activists all over the world to remember. Not just activists, everybody. The most effective way to change the world for the better, to overcome the global conspiracy to beat the New World Order. See, this is where we start getting into that stuff again. We don't need to go there. We don't need to go there to just find our center and realize that we don't like the world that we see around us enough to want to be a part of the solution. I'm a big fan of that old saying, if you spot it, you got it. You see a problem out there, you see someone suffering. If you can help somebody. Because your spirit advances leaps and bounds just by doing what your soul is called to do. You see it and you don't know what to do with it usually, and so you just ignore it. You look the other way. Number 9, remember the general purpose of life and find your individual mission. The purpose of life in general is to create, not to learn. We are creators. We feel most fulfilled when we are creating. The purpose of life in general is also to achieve self-realization. It is realize, not to ascend. Ascension is based in more separation. See, here's where we really differ, because ascension is coming back together, pulling others up with you, not about separating. See, this is a matter of opinion where the author went with this, right? Ascension is based in more separation, presupposing the idea of a here and there up high where we have to get to. Realizing the self, of course, means realizing who you really are. So it is essentially the same thing as solution number 1 above. And number 1 was remember who you are. So, like I said, I'll link this in the description, because some of this stuff is just definitely beyond me, and I think it's important to see the directions in which some people are trying to take this and realize where the truth in it is, because there's definitely truth there, but our egos tend to distort the world out of things. And essentially, when I think of ascension, I think what the author did with ascension was to try and say that it's actually this like rising up and away experience. It's an advancing that's not linear. It's not circular. Your brain wants to wrap itself around things because we have this time and place distortion here, which is this is the playground for our spirit to grow, right? We need this stuff as a matrix to give us a place to do that in, to heal the distortion. But the ascension is coming back into the fullness of who we were meant to be in the beginning. We have a lot of confusion on the ground at this moment because we all feel very much separate. We don't understand why it is the way it is. We'd like to deny that it is the way it is, and we don't know how to get back to the state of peace that is our birthright. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because it's your birthright. Nobody should have to be waking up and looking at the state of the world and going, oh, not another day of this. That's part of the distortion. We're coming out of the distortion. Okay, distortion is like scrambling in the waves, right? We are coming back to the wholeness and the truth where we are meant to be, where we're supposed to be, where we were designed to reside. The state that we're in right now is, the only word I can say for it is it's wrong. It's because of the distortion that we're in this state. Heal the distortion, the state follows. Ascension is not me going up while other people are still down here. This was something that was in the author's mind when she wrote the article, but that is not, it's not the way it works. It's coming back to wholeness. We're very fractured, okay? We're like this beautiful vase or something dropped on the ground, shattered into 1,000 pieces, and it takes a long time for us to glue them all back together, basically, to come back to wholeness, because the original form is in the cellular memory of the universe. It's like it's there waiting for us to come back to our fruition. We spend a lot of time in confusion on this planet, but like I said, the ascension is happening whether you like it or not. And I assume that the process itself will be fairly painful for most people because they like their distortions. They like seeing what they see. They like the separateness. And that's why the illusion has held true for so long up to this point. We can't afford to do that anymore because it's at what cost? At the cost of our spirits? It's not worth it to preserve this isolated identity thing that we've got going in human consciousness at the disadvantage of the collective at this point, because the disparity is becoming so great and the stress is just out of control and we can't not feel it anymore because we're coming to fruition. So we feel it as pain, we feel it as anxiety. We're learning to feel in the fullness, and it's really uncomfortable at times. But this is really important that people understand that there is a distortion and that we have to overcome the distortion. And if you don't, you're in this soul trap experience where it cannot lead you to I want to say like a satisfactory conclusion. You're here for a reason. You don't have to like it that you're here for a reason, but your reason isn't just you, not just your own. It's not just your ego coming here to gratify itself with all these temporary things and then pass away and then, lay in the ground until the resurrection comes and we all get to go to heaven based on our good deeds. There's a lot of confusion in this whole distortion. And it's time to come back to the center of that. That's what I'm doing here, is trying to help people understand. God is active in you, trying to get you to come along. Don't resist. That's my only advice. Don't resist, because the journey is beautiful. It's a grand journey when you're not in that state where you're constantly trying to resist your soul inclination to grow and have the beauty and be in union with the divine. So I really thank you for joining me here today. Like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. The ascension's on, people. We're going for it. There's no resisting it anymore. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the interaction. If you have any thoughts, please share those in the comments. And join us next time as we come together to uplift, enlighten, and ascend. Bye now.